that.
I need to practice holding up the book right.
The very casual,
Yes.
unplanned
Oh, hey, by the way.
plug. Yeah, by the way, pick it up on. Yeah.
I'm sure he did that on purpose.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Well, let me just check the crowdcast to make sure we don't have anybody kind of screaming at us that we can't see you kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay,
I
I
just
just
got
got
when we're ready to get going here.
Yep, I got a little note and said we're up and running and on and visible. So I think anytime you want to get started, Tim, we can get going.
Okay, let's do it right now. Welcome to AOE Live, episode number 16. We are recording this show live on Tuesday, October 27th. Addie Hirschten, an artist, educator, storyteller, and author of the book, The Alchemy of Art, will join us to talk about her writing, her art, and how stories can inspire and educate us about both art and life. I'm Tim Bogatz, a high school teacher from Omaha, Nebraska.
And I'm Andrew McCormick. I'm an art teacher in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and I teach the 9th grade. And we're lucky to have Addie Hirschten on tonight. Tim gave her accolades on her book, The Alchemy of Art, but on top of that, she's also a contemporary impressionist painter, public speaker, a former children's librarian, and she currently teaches classes at the Indianapolis Art Center. So, Addie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, guys. I'm happy to be here.
All right. We want to say hello to our listeners and those of you that are watching live on Crowdcast. Please join in, participate, converse, and be part of the show.
Yeah, we definitely want to hear questions from you guys. You can chat with us. Make sure you use the AOE Live hashtag. Check out the AOE Live page as this is streaming live to ask questions of Addie on the Crowdcast platform. You can ask questions, and then you can also upvote your favorite question kind of as some good ones come along. And it's just a really great way to participate in the show.
And as always, once we're done tonight, the podcast will be available on the AOE Live page, and will go up later this week on iTunes and Stitcher. Listen to it on your drive to school, at home in the evening, or even during your plan time. Hey, and Addie, because this is a show for art teachers, I'm going to start with a question about teachers. You dedicated your book to Mrs. Loon, you said. Can you tell us why she was so inspirational and what you remember about her after all these years?
Sure. Well, Mrs. Loon is an exciting, vivacious character. She's Scottish, so I want you to imagine her Scottish accent. She still teaches in Knox County Public Schools. It's down in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she can't seem to retire. Apparently, she keeps trying, and they won't let her. Several reasons. She was special. I mean, all my teachers have been special, and I've learned from all of them. But she had a great way of encouraging us by pointing out our individual strengths when we did something specific. You know, so if we did a project and we did it well, she would congratulate us and tell us specifically, you did good at that, and I'm seeing your strengths. One time, for example, I wrote a book that was about time travel and going back to the age of the dinosaurs. And after I wrote that little book, she said, you should write a real book one day when you're a grown-up. And I always remembered that. And now I have, so it seemed apt to dedicate it to her. And if you go in the book, the very last story in the Alchemy of Art stories for the classroom, it's called The Secret Garden, and it's a true story that happened to Mrs. Loon when she was a child growing up in Scotland.
Yeah, I loved reading that one. That was awesome. And by the way, everyone, here is The Alchemy of Art. It's a spectacular book, and I've loved reading it. I loved using it in my classroom, and I actually wrote an article about it on the AOE magazine that you guys can check out. That was up just last week. But the book is divided into a ton of different stories, and just kind of going with what we were saying right there, Addie, are a lot of the stories in the book, are those personal experiences, or where did you find the inspiration for all of the stories that you included in the book?
Well, I would say most of them are folk tales. So I hunted in the library in 398.2 section, my favorite place. So just, dove through that bundle of stuff to find the stories. There are some true stories about famous artists or famous paintings like the Mona Lisa and how it got stolen, things like that. And then there are some personal stories. The kite story is one that happened to me while I was teaching an art class for elementary age kids. Bloom Where You're Planted happened to me when I was in high school. So, I think all you need for a good story is some conflict and resolution. So I found a little bit in my own life.
Very cool.
So was it kind of that conflict at the time that kind of got you to think like, this is the perfect storm, this is the impetus to compile all of these stories into one book?
Yeah.
Or I didn't know if maybe there was kind of like maybe a series of things, or if it was like one big kind of culminating moment, just like now is the time that should all kind of come together.
Sure. Well, when I moved to Indianapolis and I got my job at the Indianapolis Arts Center, I started teaching for kids, and I wanted to pull from folklore for our multicultural curriculum. And I had been a children's librarian, and I'd been working as a storytelling performing artist. So I wanted to make my art classes richer with that background and with that folklore. So that's what made me start hunting for the art stories. And I was surprised once I started looking how many I found from all over the globe. And
so do you think, I wonder about like the parallels between teaching and then storytelling, and if you think that as you got kind of transitioned maybe away from child librarian to then like children's art classes, did that kind of make you and force you to start seeing the world maybe through their eyes a little bit differently, and then going back to the folk stories?
Well, when I worked as a children's librarian and I would do storytelling, I would oftentimes have a group of 20, 30 kids, and I'm basically an entertainer for them, and I'm sharing the stories with them, and you have to do a lot of very theatrical things like loud noises, and you have to, maybe if they're very young, get them to stand up every so often and move around, otherwise they'll just get the wiggles and they'll be distracting for the performance. So I certainly took a lot of those things I had learned as a performance artist into the classroom, but then you have the extra layer of I have to be a disciplinarian and I have to keep everything in order, and we have a curriculum we have to go by, which is different than if I'm just an entertainer.
So in writing the book, how long did that kind of take you? Did it flow effortlessly from you? Was it just kind of a labor of love, or was it kind of a long drawn out process and a lot of work getting that done?
Well, at first I was just gathering them to share in my own classes, and I wanted them to be in a format where I could just read it aloud if I wanted to. So I started just stacking them up, and then when I realized, hey, that there's not a book that's compiled all of the folk tales that are specifically about art out there. So there's folklore compilations that are about scary stories and stories from Romania, but there had never been one that's just art stories. And I thought, well, maybe there's a need for that, or maybe the other teachers out there could use this the way I'm using it in the classroom to keep the kids engaged, to have them be listening while they're doing their art projects. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, like, I think, Tim writes prolifically on the AOE website, and I write a little bit, and I always find writing to be, for me personally, like kind of a love-hate relationship. Like, I kind of love doing it, but I also hate doing it. And I also feel that way about painting. That was one of my kind of first loves, and what I thought as like an art major I would be, and then I kind of got seduced by sculpture and other things. So with painting, do you feel like some of these folk stories kind of inform some of your own work? Because I think painting can be a very sort of narrative art form, illustrative art form. Just wondering if there's some overlap between your research and your stories, and then also your artwork.
Yeah, usually when I do a painting, I'm inspired by the image and maybe the feeling that I want to express or purge from myself, so to speak. I'm not usually doing work that's set out to be illustrative of a specific story, although sometimes afterward I'll look for poetry or look within literature to find a passage that might give me a good title. But for the Alchemy of Art book, I did end up doing some illustrative paintings that we added at the beginning of the chapters. For example, I made my own creepy rendition of the picture of Dorian Gray that's in there. Yeah.
That's cool. And then, among everything that you do with your teaching, writing, painting, storytelling, you've also found time to do a podcast. And I would love listening to it, hearing all the stories from the book, and hearing you talk about the stories. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to create the podcast and kind of what you want your audience to take from it?
Sure. Well, I started it last spring because I wanted to share the stories from the book with other people. Especially, some of the unique ones or some of the more philosophical ones where I thought, well, I can share them with people and then they can really see how they can be picked apart and studied from a psychological level, And recently I started also interviewing other artists and art teachers as well on the podcast, and I've just started that. I'm really enjoying it, and I have to admit to you that it's kind of for a selfish reason,
Right.
and that
That's okay.
learn from those people that I'm interviewing, and then we can share the conversations back.
Right. And that's my favorite part of doing this show, honestly, is just being able to have those conversations with all of these people that I admire and people whose work I admire. I love being able to talk to so many different people.
I thought your favorite part of the podcast was getting to see you every couple of weeks. That's not the truth of it. That's just a bonus.
Up there. Maybe not my very favorite, but it's a bonus.
Right, it's a bonus.
Okay. And then, Addie, you talk a little bit about how you want art teachers to be able to use these stories in their classroom. And a lot of us are looking for, some kind of deeper meaning that we can discuss with our classes. I thought a couple of stories in your book, Pygmalion and also the picture of Dorian Gray, which you just mentioned a little bit ago, kind of lent themselves to that type of, I guess, philosophical discussion. Can you talk a little bit about either one or both of those stories and how you personally might use it in your teaching?
Sure. So let's talk about Pygmalion.
Okay.
And Pygmalion, I'll give a brief synopsis for those who are listening who might not have heard this story before. This is a classic Greek tale. Pygmalion was a sculptor, and he wanted to become really, really good at his sculpture work. So he renounced women. He said, I'm never going to get married. That's a waste of time. I'm only going to devote myself to my work. And he got better and better and better. And finally one day, he purchased this very, very large block of marble. And he was so excited to have that beautiful piece of stone that he picked up his hammer and his chisel, and he didn't even plan what he was going to create. He just started chipping away. He chipped and he worked and he got into the heart of the stone. And when he finally stepped back and the piece was completed, he had made the image of a woman. And he drops the hammer and chisel, and he falls to his knees, and he falls in love with the sculpture. And he worships the sculpture for weeks on end until finally Aphrodite, the goddess of love, swoops down from Mount Olympus and breathes life into the sculpture so that he and the sculpture can now live happily ever after. Now, I first heard about this story when I was in college, and it was brought up as an example of misogynism because the person who brought it up in a paper, they said, this is a perfect example of how men see women as objects. And and we could go down that rabbit hole. Maybe there's something there, but I don't think that people love folktales like this because they're degrading to a certain person or whatever. People love Pygmalion because they see themselves in Pygmalion. You know, I could be the sculptor, and then even though I'm a woman, I don't think it has to do with gender. So I could be a sculptor, and I could go to the stone and make whatever it is my heart is really desiring, and my own essence is going to be reflected in it. So, and I'd love to hear from you, Tim. You know, you said you've shared it with your high school students. What did they have to say about it?
No, they just kind of like that. They like the idea of just sort of, you know, attacking a rock without much of a plan to it. Because, you know, I make them spend so much time, you know, as far as planning and, you know, sketching and laying out color schemes and all that. And, you know, they love just sort of laughing at me like, you mean people can make work without planning everything out? And so they thought that was kind of entertaining. So they like to give me some crap about that. So they, you know, if they feel like I'm pushing them a little bit too hard on the front end of projects, like, do you remember that story that you read us? Like, can we just take some inspiration from that and just go? That's what they took out of it. So
right.
I don't know
totally
if that's what intended, but that's what they've been going with.
Interesting.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I would say though that even if you planned it out a lot, what you want to see more of in the world or in your own life is going to come out in your artwork.
Yeah, very true.
You know, sometimes it can sneak up on us, and you know, I've looked back at a series of paintings, and then all of a sudden I'll see a pattern, and you know, it can be shocking. It can be shocking.
Yeah, for sure.
So switching just a little bit from kind of Tim's older kids and kind of what.
Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Am I still on?
Yeah, you're still good. Just start that question over because you cut out on us.
Oh man, and it was going to be such a good question too. I better restart it. I was just going to try to zip Tim up here a little bit and say that, you know, those of us who teach older kids, you know, we are always looking for ways to get our students to think about more meaning. And Tim showed directly how he used that in his classroom. You know, we have a lot of teachers and a lot of teachers who teach elementary age kids who may not be able to kind of dig into some of those deeper meanings. So we had a really great question asked on Crowdcast specifically by Paige Hannenberg, who is an AOE live regular. She asked, you know, what would be some of the benefits of incorporating storytelling into an elementary art curriculum? And then would there be some challenges to that? Like, how would it have to look different, I guess, for that younger age?
Sure. Well, there's so many reasons why it can be great for elementary age kids. One is quite simply that they're learning empathy. They're learning to empathize with the different characters. They see how the main character goes through a conflict and then they resolve it, and then they might not be able to articulate it, but they can later take those lessons and be able to resolve conflicts within their own life. A lot of people have written tomes about why we do storytelling, including one of my favorites by a guy named Doug Lipman. But here's some ideas for you. So, for example, in the book The Alchemy of Art that I wrote, I've got a story called The Gunny Wolf. And the Gunny Wolf is a character that is like Little Red Riding Hood's story. Only here, Little Red is able to lull the wolf to sleep by singing to it. And through the power of music, she takes control of the situation and she's able to get away from the big bad wolf. Well, that story is probably the only one in the book I wouldn't read to high schoolers. I don't think they would dig it. Maybe it's because it's got the singing over and over again. But when I present that one for elementary or even younger age children, I've got some puppets. I've got a wolf puppet, and he's awesome. And So that's one way to do it, is you could be telling the story in a number of different ways that'll be engaging to them. I also like just sharing the stories with the students while they're creating their art projects for the day. And, again, they might not philosophically be able to talk about it afterward, but they still like hearing the stories. They get excited to hear them. Earlier today, went and taught and was able to drop a pin, or I could have dropped a pin while I was sharing the story because it was so silent. You would have been able to hear it. You know what I mean. But a few more that are in the book that you could use. There's Flannery's Dream. After you read that one, you could ask them to draw their dreams. Or there's Malang and the Magic Paintbrush. And after you read that one, you can ask them to illustrate an image that they would like to have spring to life and jump off the page the way it does in that story.
So Addie, I noticed that in the book, you have a lot of really great tips and practical ideas for how we as art teachers can use them in the classroom. That a lot of your suggestions are kind of collaborative in nature. What is it about collaboration that you think is so important for both artists and students?
Sure. Well, through collaboration, kids can learn how to cooperate with each other, which is a skill that will hopefully serve them as they reach adulthood.
Right.
It's hard for us adults even sometimes too. But I mean, when you think about it, there's very few projects in life that we can create that are really going to have a huge, big, strong impact without cooperation. So, for example, if I want to build a building, I've been starting to learn some carpentry skills, so I'm feeling proud of myself, right? But if I was to build a building, I would need the input of some experts, like better carpenters than me, electricians, plumbers. And if I tried to do it all myself, it would take forever, and I would lose the valuable advice of those other people. So, and through a piece of art, it can have a lot more power behind it if a group makes it. There's a group here in town that does a lot of murals, and they get the whole community involved, and they brainstorm, and they make it's so many people can say, I made that, and this is what we wanted to say, this is what we want to have here in Indianapolis, that it has a lot more power than it would have if it was just made by one person. And I think we oftentimes we focus a lot in our art classes for the kids to have their own individual voice encouraged, and I think that's great. That that we want for this to be an outlet for them to say what they want to say, and oftentimes with visual work we're saying what we can't say with words. So it's great to let them have that and go with it. But there's also a moment too when, okay, let's step back from just the egotism of it, and maybe there's something we all want to say, and it'll be more powerful in the end.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like that a lot. And just kind of touching a little bit more on a couple themes that you have there with collaboration and architecture. My favorite classroom idea that came from the book was the story about the architect Hundertwasser, I think, if I'm doing my German correctly.
You are saying
so much
right.
German. So much German in this episode.
The way he was looking at buildings and looking at architecture in a brand new way. And then looking at some of his ideas, you had kids design their ideal playground, which was a little bit, I guess, ironic to me because, this was at a school where kids didn't even have a playground. So can you talk kind of about that process and what ended up happening with that experience?
Sure. So in Indianapolis, School 58 is downtown. It's in the inner city, and this is one of the places I go to do our outreach program. So it's an after-school program. And a few years back, I think it was 4 years ago, the building was getting very run down. There was no playground. there was a parking lot, and the teachers were filling it with their cars. There's nowhere for them to play. There was an indoor gym, but it was dark. And they announced to us, they said, we're going to renovate this school. We're going to move the entire faculty and the kids and everything and plop them down in another building, boom, for a year, and we're going to do a complete overhaul. Mm-hmm. And I found this really exciting because I love fix-it-ups and before and after pictures. And I went to the kids and I said, okay, they're going to be architects, and they're going to like rearrange things, and they're going to make it different. And what would you do if you were the architect? And we looked at things like Greek columns, you know, so we looked at little architectural history, and Hundertwasser came up because Hundertwasser was a painter, and then he somehow got into architecture, even though he did not believe in the straight line. Right. So his buildings are completely wonky and organically created. And he also loves having gardens put on the top of the buildings with the idea that if you had to scoop out all those plants to put the building there, well, let's put them back on top, and that way we'll still have our oxygen and all of that good stuff. So I share these ideas with the kids. And it was kind of funny. I had kind of thought, oh, if this was me, I would be adding lots of little filigrees and color. They were much more concrete with what they wanted. And one of them that's coming to mind, their design was rather like Chutes and Ladders. I mean, it was so there's a slide coming out the third, you know, story and down and all of this cool stuff. And then a year passes, you know, we had been in that other school. We go back, and lo and behold, the architects had put a new playground on the roof of the school. Nice. Yeah, we were so excited to see that, and it's worked out well for them. They've lost a few basketballs off the top, but other than that, we're good.
Oh, that's such a cool story. I love that. And then shifting a little bit, you know, one of the big things I noticed in working with your book is there are just so many connections that you make between art and literature, art and history, art and all these other subjects. Was that something intentional that you put together that you tried to do with your book, or was it something that kind of developed organically?
Well, my background, I've gone through several different interdisciplinary programs. Mm-hmm. For example, when I was in high school, I went through the Paideia program, which is based on a book by Mortimer Adler, where we combined literature and history and studied them side by side. So we're studying Renaissance history, we're going to study Renaissance literature. Yeah. And when I was in college, I went to a program called Watauga College, that's an interdisciplinary program with Appalachian State University, which was very similar. So I've got a background in doing things that way. Yeah, and yeah. I love it because you can, history and literature and art, they don't exist separately from each other. They're not in a vacuum. You know, art is created in reaction to what's happening in the wider world. And we think of the artists as they're sitting by themselves in the room, but they're being influenced by everything, every interaction they've ever had. And you know, I can think of one concrete example where, so you guys, I'm sure, have seen the painting by Jacques-Louis David, that's The Death of Marat, that was created during the French Revolution. Yeah. So in this painting, you've got a man's body in this draped over the side of this bathtub. And the purpose of that painting was to call political attention to the injustice of Marat's murder. But if you don't understand the historical background of that painting, it's just meaningless. You know, the viewer would think, oh, it's just a guy, maybe he's sick, he's taking a bath, I don't know, you know, and the piece would lose its power. So I think if we're really going to get at the root of why we are creating any piece of artwork, you want to look at the history. You want to look at the wider world, what's happening around the artist. Look into every nook and cranny, and even into the psychology, ourselves. Even looking inside. So we've got to look outside, and we've got to look inside in order to get a better understanding of why on earth we continue to make art.
Yeah.
So that sort of universal interconnection of why we make art, is that kind of one of the reasons why throughout the book you've kind of clumped everything together by theme that's really relevant to the art making process and the teaching process, from craftsmanship, beauty, finding your muse? Is that kind of why the themes evolved, was kind of to speak to the universal quality?
Yeah. At first, I thought I was going to organize the stories by the age group that they would be most appropriate for. But then I started realizing that some of the stories I could read to my elementary age kids, and then I could go to my painting classes that I teach for adults, many of whom are in retirement age, read it to them, and they get a completely other set of meaning and nuance. They see other nuance in the story, and they loved them too. So I decided I'm going to throw out the age groups thing. That's because this is just, I don't want to limit anybody from enjoying it, and different ages are going to enjoy it in a different way. So then I decided to group them by theme, and I actually had them all laid out on my living room floor. I was trying to sort them and see patterns, and then finally came up with those individual themes that you see there: craftsmanship, beauty, perseverance, finding your muse. And I think I love seeing them side by side, because when you see all these stories about perseverance, and they're from China and Russia and and England, and they're from all over the world, all these different people and cultures, you see, well, this is universal. This is the theme of perseverance is something that generation upon generation has been trying to pass down, trying to impart that message, and so definitely it's something we should pay attention to.
Well, and I think that makes for a more dynamic structure than, I think so many sort of help books for teachers, or books for teachers about things are kind of like, this is what you do in first grade, and this is what you do in second grade, because clearly first graders and second graders are completely different entities, and like they really aren't. It's like the things that bind us together as humans don't have like a born on date, it's like it's just kind of ridiculous. But
and development can take a while for some of us,
Right.
Very true. Very true. And then, Addie, one last, I guess, big important question for you. We've touched on a lot of these, interconnected issues and big themes and things like that with your book. Is there anything that we're missing there? Is there anything else that you think people should, or that you want people to be able to take away from your book?
So you want me to stand on a soapbox about it? That's what I'm hearing. I'm kidding. Yeah, no, I mean, there is definitely a drive to the book that's part of my own philosophy. So in many of these stories, the artist reaches a point of conflict where they've got to take action to resolve their problems. And when I read these stories to my students, I so sincerely want for them to feel empowered to take action in their own lives. And it doesn't even have to be through artwork. It could be in any number of different ways. But I also want for them to understand that art is a language that they can use to say what they want to say.
Very true. Very cool. All right, well, Addie, thank you very much for being on the show tonight. But before we let you go, with every guest, we like to do the lightning round. So, are you ready for that?
Ooh, I suppose so.
All right.
And we rehearse these at all beforehand. You're walking into these just cold turkey. So, Addie, I got to ask, since you're in the podcasting business, can you make one or two recommendations for our listeners out there of some podcasts that you just totally love?
Sure, I love Artists Helping Artists, and that is a podcast that is about art marketing. And most of the people who are interviewed on it and the host, Leslie Seda, they're painters. But they also hit on art philosophy a lot. And certainly if you're interested in the business of art, the nuts and bolts, and that's something that you want to do, I would recommend Artists Helping Artists.
All right, number two. I've heard from my friends all about all these great restaurants that are in Indianapolis. So either in your city or just anywhere else, what is the best restaurant you've ever been to?
I didn't know we were known for restaurants, though. Okay. Well, the best restaurant I've been to recently was actually not in Indianapolis. Oh, sorry, Indianapolis. No, it's in Spencer, Indiana, which is south of Indy by, I don't know, an hour or so.
Okay.
Kind of a small little town. But it's a place called El Ranchero, and it's just a regular Mexican restaurant. But I was absolutely blown away when I walked in there, because the entire place, except the ceiling, I mean, everything is covered in these wood carvings that are also hand painted by artisans in Guadalajara. I tried to get them to tell me who exactly made this, and they didn't know, but they could tell me that it was a group of people from Guadalajara who put it together, and it was like pieces of a puzzle. So.
Nice. That sounds really intriguing.
Yeah, food wasn't bad either, but
the wood carving is where it's at.
Yeah, I mean the chairs, I got to sit on it. It was cool.
That's awesome. All right, and we know you're a painter as well. Can you tell us about your favorite artwork that you've ever created?
That I've ever created. Yeah, that it's tough because each one is like a little baby.
Right.
And represents that special moment, and you let them out into the world. But there is one that I've had in a couple of shows, but I just plain don't want to sell it, and I've decided I'm just not going to sell it for now. And it's called Leaves Have Ripened, and the title comes from a Robert Frost poem. But in the painting you have a woman who is nude, and she's falling through the air, and you can see she's fallen from the branch of a tree, and there's all these leaves that are falling around her. It's perfect, I'm telling you, this time of year, because outside my window there's tons of leaves falling as well, and there's a moon below her. And it's a very sensual piece, so it feels very personal, but but it's also about death, and there will come a moment when her body's going to hit the ground. And so, as I said, not for sale, but if you go to my blog, you can find it. So you can type Google Hirschten, it's my name, and Leaves Have Ripened, and it'll pop up, and you can see the image of that one.
Cool.
That was such a great answer. Now I feel like a complete idiot for asking this really lighthearted question, because that was all deep and metaphorical, and then I'm like, hey. But Addie, I kind of had lots of different jobs and kind of a diverse educational background. Just kind of wondering, what are some of the weirdest jobs, or the weirdest job that you've ever had?
I think that the weirdest job I've ever had was in college. I cleaned hotel rooms with a friend of mine, and it was so strange what people would leave in the rooms. For the weirdest day, we walked in and it was a stayover, so the person was staying overnight. They had left a taxidermied cat on the table with a tip for us right by it.
God.
Yeah.
That sounds like
That's
the
what
setup for like a Candid Camera episode or something. Like you're gonna grab the money and the cat's gonna get you or something.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Man, you nailed that question. You're like 4 for 4. That's definitely a
Wow.
weird job. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And I have witnesses to that too. So, I didn't make that up. Some things you can't make up,
Yeah, no doubt. All right, and then last one, and you can't answer your own book for this one, but what is one thing that you think everyone should read? Recommendation for something that people should read?
Sure. Well, I would recommend, particularly because this is a podcast for art educators, a book that's called Learning by Heart, Teachings to Free the Creative Spirit, and that's by Karita Kent and Jan Stewart. Karita Kent was a California artist who was also a nun, and she worked as an art teacher for years and was very influential. One of her quotes is at the beginning of my book. She said, "The root meaning of art is to fit together, and we all do that every day. We're not all of us painters, but we're all artists. Each time we fit things together, we're creating."
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. And it's a very inspiring, uplifting book, and it does have some curriculum ideas in it as well. So again, that's Learning by Heart.
Nice. I like that. All right. Well, Addie, thank you very much for being our guest this evening. Before you get out of here, though, will you let our audience know where they can purchase this lovely book right here and your website so we can see some of your work?
I will. So my website is azhirfineart.com. That's azhirfineart.com. And if you go there, you can find a link to purchase the book. You can join my monthly newsletter, which, by the way, next month I'm giving away a painting to one of the subscribers of my newsletter. So if you want to put your name in the hat for that, be sure to join my newsletter. And you can also find a link to my podcast and other things that I'm up to as well. And thank you so much, Tim and Andrew, for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, man. Are you still there? Hopefully I didn't kick you off.
No, I'm good. I'm ready to go.
All
We got things to talk about now.
I know, yeah. Better than just you and me getting together. Jeez.
Yeah.
No,
go ahead.
Well, there were some kind of, just kind of taking notes through the thing. There were some ideas early on that I really liked. I was really touched by the story of her fourth grade teacher, and it brought back memories for me when I was an elementary teacher. I did that for about 4 years.
Yeah.
Fourth grade was like my favorite grade. I really like that age group. They're sufficient enough, and I actually believe it or not, Tim, I was actually kind of a rotten kid, like kindergarten through third grade, and then I had a fourth grade teacher. He really kind of my feet to the fire and didn't let me get away with any nonsense, and she really kind of changed things for me. So when she talked about her fourth grade teacher highlighting individual strengths, rather than trying to correct everyone's behavior and make everyone the same, she individual strengths, which I thought was a really just touching story.
Oh, absolutely. Positivity goes such a long way in your classroom. Positivity and encouragement. Best tools a teacher has.
Yeah. The other thing I really, really liked, and it's weird because maybe it's like I glommed onto this idea because I've been struggling with it or preaching it to my own classes, is the idea of conflict. And I know every good story has conflict. You have your formula of hero, higher goal, conflict, protagonist, resolution, all that stuff. But this notion of conflict, I don't think, or I think our society, we've kind of lost the notion that conflict in some ways can be good, or it's to be expected. So I'm talking a lot in my class about frustration and how we deal with frustration and persevere through frustration. And I keep telling my students, like, listen, number one, whoever told you art was going to be easy, they're a liar. Like, they just lied to you right off the bat. Like, it ain't going to be easy all the time.
Yep.
And, and if it was easy, we'd all still in ninth grade be doing, like, second grade artwork. Like, because that's really easy for a ninth grader. And so I tell them that frustration is normal, and you should be frustrated, but to learn how to get through that. And I find the opposite of that, which a lot of my kids kind of have expressed to me that they operate under in schools, is boredom. Like, we don't challenge and frustrate our kids enough. And I think, that book, that notion of perseverance, that's a really great takeaway. So.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, there are a lot of takeaways from that book. Like, I don't know, you can probably tell I absolutely love the book in its entirety, because I got a copy and I've been using it with my classes. And, whether I'm teaching with it, like some of the things that Addie suggested, they've led to some really cool lessons, some really good conversations with my kids. And there are also times where I just read the stories to my kids. And so sometimes they really do sort of hit on those big ideas, but other times it's just, quality entertainment while kids are working. And I think there's a lot to offer, whether you are just looking for something simple or whether you're trying to touch on some of those big ideas.
Yeah, and we all kind of agreed, at the end, the reason it resonates with your kids and it resonates with us, storytelling is universal. I mean, look at I look at the contemporary equivalent of our story narrator. Like, where are we getting a lot of our stories from? TV and movies, and like Pixar is absolutely killing it right now, and that's because Pixar understands that they're in the storytelling business, and that's what they do really, really well, and that's why we all glom onto their movies, young and old alike. There's something for all of us to get out of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, man, that was a good talk. We've only got a couple last little sign-out things to do. No technical difficulties. Knock on wood, I might be...
That we know of, anyway.
Right, we might... and something might have gone horribly wrong. So once we end, guys, make sure you check out my Twitter feed and Tim's. I'm AOJO McCormick, and Tim is East Art Room. We'll have maybe some links to the discussion night, and definitely search up that AOE Live hashtag to continue the discussion of storytelling with Addie Hirschten.
And the podcast will be available on the AOE Live page, and by tomorrow it should be able to download on iTunes, the podcast app, and Stitcher. Listen to it on your drive, at home in the evening, or even during your plan time. Hey, now, we do have some exciting news and also some sad news before we wrap up tonight. First, the exciting stuff. We are about 5 days away from the launch of the AOE Studio classes. I've had a lot of fun personally in just playing a little part in helping develop them, and I'm actually getting the opportunity to teach the ceramics class. But, if that scares you, don't let that dissuade you. Despite the fact I'm teaching it, it's still going to be a really, really great class. I think it's an awesome way for teachers to not only develop their studio skills, but also make those skills really relevant to the classroom. And if they do interest you, there's still time to sign up. Just go to theartofed.com and click on the Studio Classes tab at the top of the page. It has all the information for ceramics and printmaking, which are starting in November, and then drawing will be starting up in December. The other exciting one is registration for the AOE Winter 2016 conference is now open. As Jessica always says, ridiculously relevant professional development is what AOE does best, and this is another great example. On the Art of Ed page, you can click the conference icon and check out all the great presenters. Danny Gregory is the first of the featured presenters to be announced, and the free swag is always a big draw, and it's going to be a bigger and better box than we've ever had before. And you can check out everything else amazing that comes along with the conference, just $89. We'll reserve your spot right now for Saturday, January 30th, and it's a great conference. We would definitely love to see you there.
And Tim, you're presenting, right? You've got a little talk that you're
I will be there.
Yep, and
I'm going to be talking... Okay, sweet. I'm going to be talking about stepping out of your comfort zone, not only for your students, but as a teacher as well, and talking about how to do that with some of the really more fun studio projects that I like to do.
And yeah, I'm going to cover some STEAM things. So we're going to talk about 3D printing and game design. Now, Tim, I kind of
Very cool.
see in our signing off here, you covered the two cool and exciting things and given me kind of the melancholy, bittersweet
I
bit of
left you
news
with the
here.
rough one. I'm sorry.
So we do have one little announcement before we go tonight. We as a team over here at AOE Live, we've decided it is actually time to retire AOE Live coming up very soon. We will be doing just 2 more shows after tonight. We've kind of discovered we bumped up against the ceiling of what's possible with both a live hangout and then a really high quality audio podcast, and we're it's kind of tough sometimes to do both really, really well, as evident by the episodes where we've had some technical difficulties. So we are developing, though, a new podcast, and that will be called Art Ed Radio, and that should be out roughly January, but we don't have a real definite timeline on that. So definitely keep your ear to the ground on the Art of Ed website to kind of see when that will be coming up. And we're just both really, really excited about the journey and kind of how AOE Live is going to evolve and change into Art of Ed Radio.
Yeah, definitely. We do want everybody to join us, however, for our final 2 shows because they are going to be incredible. Bob Reeker will be on our next show. He's the coordinator for the 2016 NAEA National Convention in Chicago. He's going to join us on November 10th, and Laura Lohman from the Painted Paper blog will close us out on November 24th. It's going to be a great way to end our run here. But that is going to do it for us tonight. So I am Tim Bogatz, and on behalf of Andrew McCormick and everyone at the Art of Ed, thank you for joining us on AOE Live.
Yep, goodbye, everybody. We'll see you later. Oh, hang up.
Live.